For nearly 80 years, NATO has been the backbone of European security, with the US playing the lead role in keeping the alliance strong. But now, that assumption is looking shakier than ever. Former President Donald Trump has made no secret of his skepticism toward NATO, throwing out bombshell comments about only defending allies who pay up and warming up to Vladimir Putin, while turning a cold shoulder to Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky. That's left European leaders staring down a question they never thought they'd have to answer. Is the US still a reliable security partner? And if not, then what? Can NATO stand on its own? Now, let's not get it twisted. NATO without the US isn't some helpless puppy. The alliance still boasts 31 other member nations, over 1 million troops, and some of the most advanced weaponry on the planet. Not to mention, Europe isn't exactly broke. It has the money and tech to step up if push comes to shove. In terms of sheer financial power, the US and Germany lead NATO's military budget contributions at nearly 16% each, with the UK and France following closely behind at 11% and 10%. Analysts argue that if European nations work together and invest in the right gear, they could create a serious military force, even one capable of standing up to Russia. Ben Schreier, a top expert at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, ISS, put it bluntly, if Europe wanted to, it could be a major conventional and nuclear deterrent. But that's the kicker. Does Europe actually want to? The US and NATO, a long, complicated history. For over 7 decades, the US has been the glue holding NATO together, from stationing troops in Europe as a deterrent during the Cold War, to spearheading NATO-led interventions in the Balkans in the 90s. Washington has always been at the helm. Even before Trump's latest foreign policy shake-ups, the US played a crucial role in backing Ukraine against Russia's aggression. But now, things are shifting. Trump's explosive Oval Office clash with Zelensky, where he reportedly halted US aid to Ukraine, felt like more than just a policy dispute. Dan Fried, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, compared it to a rupture in America's long-standing role as the leader of the free world. And if you ask John Luff, a former NATO official, the US-Europe relationship isn't just strained, it might be broken beyond repair. The growing rift. Luff's take? The US no longer sees Europe as a partner, but rather a competitor, or even, in some cases, a rival. That leaves the all-important question of US commitment to NATO's defence hanging by a thread. If Washington is losing interest, can Europe trust that the cavalry will show up when needed? For some, the answer is already clear. Once you start to lose part of that commitment, you effectively lose it all, Luff warned. In fact, he noted that some in Europe are even wondering whether the US could become an adversary rather than an ally. Yeah, things are getting that serious. A stronger Europe without the US. But here's a hot take. Maybe a NATO without the US isn't such a bad thing. Some analysts argue that if European nations can't count on the US anymore, they'll be forced to step up their own defence. Moritz Greyfrath, a security and foreign policy expert, even suggests that a US withdrawal could lead to a stronger Europe, not a weaker one. And according to Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, that transformation is already happening. In his words, Europe is truly capable of winning any military, financial or economic confrontation with Russia. We just had to start believing in it. With the European Union stepping up its defence spending, that belief might be turning into reality. What does Europe have? If Europe did decide to go full independence mode, could it actually work? Well, let's talk numbers. Turkey boasts NATO's second largest military, with 355,200 active personnel, a powerhouse force second only to the US. Then you've got France, 202,200, Germany, 179,850, Poland, 164,100. Italy, 161,850. The UK, 141,100. Greece, 132,000. And Spain, 122,200. Not exactly a weak lineup. On top of that, European nations are among the biggest spenders on military technology. France has nuclear weapons, Germany has been ramping up its defence budgets, and Poland is investing heavily in modernising its forces. The UK, despite political chaos, remains one of the strongest military powers in the world. Put all that together, and Europe isn't exactly defenceless. But are they ready for the responsibility? Here's where things get tricky. Having resources and actually using them are two very different things. Europe has long relied on the US for protection, and changing that mindset won't be easy. For one, European defence spending has been all over the place. While some countries, like Poland and the Baltic states, have taken the Russian threat seriously and boosted their budgets, others, looking at you, Germany, have been dragging their feet. And let's not even start on Hungary, which seems more interested in cozying up to Russia than preparing for war. Then there's the issue of coordination. Right now, European nations don't exactly have the best track record when it comes to working together on military issues. The EU's attempts at creating a joint military force have been slow and filled with bureaucratic nightmares. NATO, despite being a military alliance, still struggles with internal politics and differing priorities. If Europe wants to stand on its own, it needs to get its act together, and fast. That means increasing defence spending, modernising military infrastructure, and, most importantly, figuring out how to actually work together in a crisis. The Russia problem. Let's not forget the elephant in the room. Russia. While European nations do have the capability to defend themselves, there's no denying that the US has been the biggest deterrent against Russian aggression. If Washington decides to take a back seat, will Europe be able to fill that void? Right now, Russia's military isn't the invincible force it once seemed to be. Its struggles in Ukraine have shown major weaknesses, and Western sanctions have crippled its economy. But that doesn't mean Putin is going to back down. If anything, a weaker NATO could embolden Moscow to push its luck even further. Poland took the lead. Prime Minister Donald Tusk just dropped a bombshell in Parliament. The country is seriously looking at nuclear weapons and mandatory military training for all men. Why? Because Poland wants a 500,000-strong army ready to face down Russia. This isn't just about flexing military muscle, it's about survival. Europe is getting increasingly nervous that Donald Trump might cozy up to the Kremlin and ditch NATO, leaving Poland high and dry. For Warsaw, that's an existential crisis. Tusk confirmed that Poland is in deep talks with France about joining its nuclear umbrella, something President Emmanuel Macron has hinted could be an option for European allies. But Poland isn't just looking for someone else's protection. It wants to level up its own firepower. We have to understand that Poland must reach for the most modern capabilities, including nuclear and unconventional weapons, Tusk said. This isn't a race for war, it's a race for security. And he's not wrong. Just look at Ukraine. It gave up its nuclear arsenal years ago, and now it's being torn apart by Russia. Poland isn't about to make the same mistake. It's not just about nukes. Poland is overhauling its entire military. By the end of the year, Tusk wants a plan in place to train every adult male for war. That's right, every man will be prepared to defend the country if the need arises. Right now, Poland's army stands at around 200,000 troops, making it the third largest in NATO after the US and Turkey. But Tusk pointed out that Ukraine has around 800,000 soldiers, while Russia boasts a massive 1.3 million. Poland doesn't want to be caught unprepared. Every healthy man should want to train to defend the homeland, Tusk declared. But don't worry, this isn't a return to old-school conscription. which Poland scrapped in 2008. Instead, it's a more modern, strategic reserve force. Women can volunteer too, but Tusk made it clear: war is still, to a greater extent, the domain of men. Why Poland is taking no chances? This military build-up isn't happening in a vacuum. Poland is deeply worried that Trump might turn his back on NATO, forcing Europe to fend for itself. Poles will not adopt the philosophy that we are completely powerless and helpless if President Trump has decided to adjust policy, Tusk said. Translation: Poland isn't putting all its eggs in the US basket anymore. But that doesn't mean Warsaw is abandoning NATO. Quite the opposite. Poland is already the alliance's biggest spender, allocating a whopping 4.7% of its GDP to defence, more than any other NATO country. And Tusk wants to push that to 5%, matching Trump's own demands for increased European military spending. Poland is throwing billions at military hardware, buying Abrams tanks, Patriot missile defence systems, and F-35 fighters from the US, along with a massive haul of South Korean tanks, howitzers, and rocket systems. Warsaw is making it clear it's not waiting around for someone else to save it. Trust issues with the US. Poland has built its security strategy around close ties with the US, even hosting around 10,000 American troops. But lately, Washington's signals have been confusing. The world watched as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky got lectured at the White House, US military aid to Ukraine got cut off, and Trump hinted that NATO allies might not get protection if he thinks they aren't spending enough. That's a nightmare scenario for Poland. We are seeing a deep correction in US policy with regard to Ukraine, but we can't ignore it just because we don't like it, Tusk said. Poland knows it has to be realistic. Europe needs to step up. Tusk also made it clear Europe has the economic power to counter Russia, but it's been held back by indecision, self-doubt, and, frankly, cowardice. Right now, 500 million Europeans are begging 300 million Americans for protection from 140 million Russians, who have been unable to defeat 50 million Ukrainians for 3 years, he pointed out. That's not a good look for Europe. Poland is also moving to ditch international treaties that ban anti-personnel landmines and cluster munitions, signalling that it's preparing for all-out war if necessary. But one thing is off the table: sending Polish troops to Ukraine. France and the UK have floated the idea of deploying soldiers to oversee a future peace deal, but Tusk shot that down. Poland will arm itself to the teeth, but it's not about to get dragged into someone else's fight. At least, not yet. The future of NATO. So where does this leave NATO? If the US backs away, will the alliance collapse, or will Europe finally take the reins? The answer isn't clear, but one thing's for sure. Europe is at a crossroads. It can either step up and prove that it doesn't need American muscle to survive, or it can keep hoping that the US stays involved just a little longer. For now, NATO still exists as a strong alliance, but the cracks are showing. If Europe wants to remain secure, it has some serious decisions to make. The question is, will it rise to the challenge, or will it wait until it's too late?